blow this up.
Look alive, Bomb Squad. We are back for another installment of Let's Blow This Up. I am your host, Jason Sircone, and I am flanked by the dynamic duo of Marc Ronick and Simona Costantini here on the Co-Host Collective series. What's going on, my friends?
Good morning, afternoon, whatever it is.
We're back.
Love having you guys as a part of this series, and today we're going to test the waters in regards to download numbers. And I know that I've had my rants and I've had my feelings about podcast download numbers over the years, but today we want to put a different spin on this because despite the fact that I have been known to go off on this subject, I do understand that there is importance. And thankfully, I have friends that keep me tethered to the ground so I don't float too far away with my beliefs in this. Mark, you being one of them, because you've had many conversations about this.
We have.
So
I feel like I'm like the fuel in the fire. I'm like, more, tell me more, tell me more. Like,
well, we'll each take a side, and Simona, then you're the tiebreaker. You jump in, and then whichever side wins, we'll just go to town on that particular aspect. All right.
Deal.
Well, this should make for a great episode then. So we want to talk today about the importance of download numbers, but more so when it's important. And I think that might be what sets me off, is that too often new podcasters come into this and instantly think that downloads are just going to be a thing because they started a podcast. And then when that doesn't happen, they get turned off by podcasting and think it doesn't work and stop believing in themselves. And all of a sudden the value of their message diminishes. And it couldn't be further from that. So we want to put some clarity on this and talk about when it's important for download numbers to be utilized, viewed, put into play, whatever terminology you want to apply to it. Mark, I'm going to start with you because I know that you're very passionate about this subject as well, based on our past conversations. When do you typically start looking at downloads when a new podcast comes to life for one of your clients?
When do I look? Is that the question?
Yeah. Again, we're not trying to dive into this immediately. So what's the time frame on when you start utilizing download numbers for?
I actually have, there's one client who's relatively new. She's been at it for a few months now. And I think this is right around the point when I told her it was okay to start paying attention to her numbers. Okay. She took it really seriously. And I think partially because it's hard not to, right? All these podcast platforms that we use, that's the first number we see. It's always like, it doesn't even matter what platform. Anyone that I use, the download number is next to that episode title. Yeah. So you can't avoid it. But I asked her, please, let's not even think about those download numbers until at least 2 to 3 months into it. And that's where we are now. So I think we're going to have that conversation soon.
How about you, Simona?
I actually look right off the bat, but not because I'm judging if it's good or bad or this or that. I mostly pay attention to it because I know my clients are wanting to know what their numbers are right off the bat. And so I'm very just transparent with them. I had a show that launched in December, end of November, beginning of December. And when the show first launched, it had something like, I don't know, it was like 16 downloads an episode or something like that. She just released an episode and it had over 300 downloads on it. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, it's so relative. Like you need to have a benchmark of where you started and then you just keep going. And then that's the conversation that we're having, is more the mindset behind it of like, why is this actually so important to you?
It all comes back to mindset. I like that.
Well,
and I will say though, especially with a client, I don't say it to every client. I say it to the ones that I know may obsess more about it. That's one. And two, I'm always looking. That's one of the things that I will tell them is, you don't worry about it right now. I'll worry about it for you. And I'll be paying attention, much to your point, Simona, because you do want to benchmark. You do want to know and see progress, right? It's not necessarily about getting 1 million downloads right away. But if that's your goal, fine. Let's just track that and see how close we're getting to it and how far we have to go to get there.
Exactly. Because when you're looking at all of those different pieces, you're wanting to pay attention to the downloads because you want to see which topics are resonating most with the listener, what titles are working best. Does the description have anything to do in it? Is it the guest that you brought on? So without looking from the beginning, you don't really know. But I think that it goes back to podcasting overall and like the mission of podcasting and why the show exists, because not everyone needs to care about the downloads. There's other ways to track metrics and see if your show is quote unquote working for what it is you want it to do. If you're wanting to make sales and have it be a lead gen tool, then your focus is my show converting, and is that, the right metric to be watching. So it's kind of relative. Like I've seen shows with like 20 downloads sell ad space for multiple 6 figures in a year because it's targeted. And those are like some of my clients, like I know firsthand. And then you have people who have, 3,000 downloads an episode and they don't convert at all. So is that balance, right?
And I think it starts with setting the proper expectations on the front end, whether you're working with somebody that's going to help you do that or you're doing it yourself, coming into it, understanding that this is how I should evaluate this metric. It's going to help a lot, because I guarantee you there is no podcast why that only contains download numbers. That's not the reason why someone is starting a podcast. In essence, the downloads become a byproduct.
Yeah.
Because they have a message, they have a mission, they have something they want to get out to the world. And as it gets better, it grows, and there's hopefully exponential growth, and a number of other things, as you said, Simona, could come into play, which is why I've always had that thorn in my side with the podcast hosting companies, to have that number right in your face when you first log in. What if that's not my goal? Maybe I need to see retention. Maybe I need to see something else, but we're basing everything on downloads. I mean, I'd have to say probably the vast majority are looking at that statistic. But again, it all comes down to evaluating it the right way so you don't let it throw you off your game. And that's really the message. We don't want it to derail you before you ever have a chance to break through.
Can I add to why this annoys me so much when people only look at the downloads? Let me tell you. I have had my show, obviously, on Apple Podcasts. My Happiness Happens show has been on Apple Podcasts, obviously, since I began the show. Every single time I go and look at the metrics on Apple, it doesn't correlate to any of the data that I'm seeing on the back end.
Agreed.
It never, ever lines up. Like it'll say that my podcast episode has a total of 2 downloads. Okay. Then I'll go into my hosting platform and it'll say this episode, 90% of your traffic came from Apple, and there's way more than 2 downloads. And so I'm like, well, this makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
It's like confusing.
I have the same issue a lot of times, whether it's my shows, whether it's my clients. It's a hard one because sometimes the clients will say, this isn't making sense. And I just have to say, I know.
It doesn't.
There's another reason for you not to look. Let me handle this. No, that's crazy. And that's one of the things I've always, I don't know what the deal, like you guys, maybe you have an answer to this. I don't know. I've always wondered why we have to go directly into Apple, directly into Spotify to get retention numbers. We can't get those through, like for a Buzzsprout, for example. You don't have those numbers available. Do you have other metrics that you can utilize to your advantage, but not that one? I don't know. That seems to be the most important one, because even if you get a download, that doesn't necessarily mean that anybody listened. But then the ones that do listen, you want to make sure that they're sticking around till the end. So how do you gauge that? And then you have to just take extra steps to find out those numbers. So that's just always been one of my.
It's actually really interesting though when you think about it, because for something like YouTube, for example, it's so easy to see and track the metrics the whole way. You click on your video, you can see when people start to drop off and all that. So it's like the technology exists, but how is it that the podcasting download world has not caught up to be able to do the same thing? In some ways it has. You can see some of that stuff on Spotify and on Apple, but I feel like it should be able to be seen on the back end of a hosting platform.
Agreed.
With all the tech, like you're telling me we have robots that are like flying cars in the sky, and you can't, we can't figure out the podcast.
We have robots flying cars in the sky?
Yeah, where is this breaking news coming from?
I mean, I don't know. I saw a model of a flying car that was flying in the air.
Okay.
I'll have to send the link. Otherwise, this might be false news.
I don't know how it is elsewhere in the world, but in Pittsburgh, we can't even make left turns properly. I don't want any cars flying above, because that would be anarchy in the sky.
Yeah.
Not to venture too far off topic.
I know that Spotify is making more of an effort, I feel like, to show more and be more transparent. The thing that bothers me about Spotify for Creators is that effort is only being applied to their platform, meaning only Spotify users. That's the data that we're getting it from. They're not collecting it across the board. And I don't know, maybe that has to do with Apple and some of these others having proprietary information they're not including it in their API for others to use it. Who knows? There could be a lot of reasons why, but yeah, at least it's nice to see that Spotify, and I think that's because Spotify wants to compete more with YouTube than they do Apple. So part of that competition means they've got to step up their statistical game.
One thing that I just did, we just launched a podcast for Northflow, which is the company that I'm a co-founder of. And so we just launched a podcast for this brand. It's called Behind the Workflow. And one thing that I did, I've never done this before, I uploaded the show to the hosting platform, which we use Captivate FM. So uploaded it to there. I actually didn't connect Spotify directly into the hosting platform. And I uploaded the show onto Spotify on its own, as Spotify being the hosting platform, and nothing is connected. It doesn't talk to each other because on Spotify as the hosting platform, you pull in different data, you pull in your audience, like all that stuff. But if it's your hosting platform, you're also pulling from other places as well, versus having the content just on Spotify. I can upload just the video version and not have to worry about audio, video, this, that, whatever. Then I can upload clips, and I feel like it's like its own controlled space where I can test and see how does it actually perform versus having it connected through the hosting platform.
That's cool. That's very smart.
Simona, when we do season 4, remind me to bring you back. I want to hear how that went.
I will.
Yeah, because that would be an interesting case study to see over a 6-month period how that's progressed. Because I've heard of people doing that, but there really hasn't been any tangible data. Because I believe Spotify just made this an option to where you can upload just the video. So now when that's uploaded, I can, through my Spotify app, watch it like I was watching it on YouTube, correct?
Yep.
Exactly.
You have the choice. You have the choice. You can actually just listen. It'll give you the audio only version or the video.
Interesting.
And what you can also, I guess another good thing about it is when you upload your audio to your hosting platform, obviously it's sending out the audio to Spotify as well. And then if you upload a video after the fact, it's overriding the content that's already there. And so now this way you're just uploading one file directly to Spotify and getting all of the data directly through there. So I'll keep you updated. I've heard of a couple people doing this as well. I learned about this from another industry friend of ours, and I thought I would test it. I thought I would see.
Cool. I like it. Yeah. And this will definitely, again, this will be something to revisit and see how that progressed. Looking forward to that. So look, season 4 preview already being thrown out.
Yeah.
Look at that.
So let's talk about this in regards to just the obsession of why we look at this metric first. Do you feel it stems from the fact that it's right in our face when we first log into our hosting platforms? Or is there something else that we're just not thinking about on a different level regarding, I feel like this is the only metric that matters, and did some guru tell me that? Or is there something else in play? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that for one, yes, I think it has to do with that. It's always in our faces. I think, but that goes beyond podcast platforms. That's social media as well. We're looking at the view counts all the time. Those are big roles in it. And I think that another big reason, the podcast industry in general, the analytics suck. We don't get a lot to choose from. It's it's retention rate. I mean, and then it's demographics,
right?
But, and Apple sometimes will tell us a little bit more, but they're basically breaking down those same two numbers, the download numbers versus retention, but they're not giving us that much more to work with. So what else can we focus on?
Yeah. And it's so skewed too. I'm sorry, Simona. I was going to say it's so skewed too, because we've talked about that before too. A download doesn't equate to a listen.
Nope.
Especially if someone's subscribed to your show, they're going to get that download automatically to their device. But if they ever listen is another story. So that completely throws the numbers out of whack.
Yeah. I would love it if the platforms showed us, instead of the download numbers, what percentage on average is being consumed of each episode. Yes. I think that would instantly change the mindset of a lot of podcasters out there.
I agree.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's one of the things that you can see on Spotify for creators backend. Like you can see after your video or episode or whatever shows up in the feed, how many people clicked and converted. And then on top of that, how many people listen for 60 seconds or more. And so again, I go back to like, if that technology already exists, how can it not be implemented? Because I feel like downloads are a significant tracker for people to know if their show is successful or not. People don't necessarily hear from their audience all the time. People don't know how far a post can reach. You don't know who's listening, really.
Yeah.
And so you're judging your success based off of the number that you see. And you're seeing, is it growing or is it going down? What does that metric look like? That's really the only benchmark most people have to seeing the actual performance of their show overall, because you don't hear from people, because it's harder to connect with your audience. And also, you know, sometimes if you launch a product or something and it doesn't convert, it can be like, hold on, I have all these downloads and listeners, but why? And then on top of that, now you go into different analytics of like, you know, people who inflate their downloads, who purchase services that run all kinds of ads. Like I'm working with a client right now on strategy specifically, and I was analyzing the whole back end of her show, and I'm looking at the stats and I'm like, what is happening here? So she had like 600 downloads, 700 downloads an episode up until a certain point. And then it dropped down to 30 downloads an episode. And I was like, what is happening? She had her show for a year. It was absolutely nuts. And she was paying this service to get her essentially fake downloads on her content. And then when you stop paying for that, well, what is your real retention? Is about 30 people listening. So how do you judge the growth on that week over week, month over month, year over year, when you're playing with data that's skewed?
Yep.
And what was her logic for doing that?
She wanted a bigger reach. They promised her, you know, you'll have X amount of downloads per episode, and then, you know, your show will rank and you will this and you will this. But all of those things are all vanity things. You got to go back to what is the purpose of the show and the goal. And then when I was looking at all of her stuff, I'm like, the messaging is literally a mess. And I like told her that also, so it's fine. But it needed some consistency, and you can't get the consistency if you don't actually know who's listening and what is resonating.
Mind blowing.
So we're about done here today. No, I'm just kidding.
Honestly, I worked with a client that we went through that on Instagram, and then he wanted to do it with his podcast. And I just watching it on Instagram told him, you're getting shadow banned. You're going to get crushed here. And you don't want that to happen to your podcast as well. Because again, this is why I feel there needs to be more to your overall goals and objectives than just hitting massive downloads. Because you could say, yeah, I want to hit X amount of downloads so I can sell advertising, so I can get sponsorship, so on and so forth. But there has to be something else that keeps you invested in the process, because A, it's going to take a while to get to that point. And B, along the way, it's going to be skewed with everything that was just laid out over the last few minutes. So think bigger in regards to how you set goals for your podcast.
And that's targeted. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, that's something that you just said too. I think part of the reason why people obsess so much is because for the longest time, it's changing these days, but for the longest time, that's what sponsors and brands looked at. That, you know, there's the old radio CPM model that is people still use. Sponsors are still following today. More of them are starting to recognize engagement is a more important, and retention is more important. But I think that's part of the thing, is that we are trained to focus on download numbers because that, we're told, it equals sponsors. So that's why we obsess over those numbers.
When in reality, it's relatability, likability. Do you see yourself in the message that someone else is sharing? You know, I have someone who comes to mind who makes quite a bit doing what he does, and is someone that people can relate to. You know what I mean? So if you're wanting to make money out of what you're doing, people will buy all kinds of things, but people are ultimately buying, like, not buying a relationship, but people are investing in their future selves based off of the person that they see in front of them. You know what I mean?
For sure.
It has to do with downloads, for sure. But also, like, again, I have some clients that have like 60 downloads an episode, 120 downloads an episode, and they're doing 6-figure brand deals every single year because they know how to position. It's positioning. So important. And so if you're just looking at just analytics, it's not going to give you a whole story. Like, of course you want to grow and you want to be growing in the right direction. But if you're growing and talking, like if you're talking to no one, you're not going to grow anywhere because people aren't resonating with what you're saying.
Right. Bingo. And that's why I've always been a firm believer of the numbers will fall into place. The better your messaging is, the more involved you get with creating great content, the more invested you are in what you're bringing to your audience. It's going to just make sure those numbers come into play, but it's not going to be forced because your content's right in the right place, because it's resonating and making the proper connections. All of a sudden, hey, these people are telling others to listen to, and you're experiencing that exponential growth. That's where it's at. But if you don't get to that point first, you're never going to experience. You're just going to be constantly frustrated by that number that stares you in the face when you first log into your podcast app. Sad
exactly. It's very true.
So how do we ignore it? Is there any discipline that you've ever told anybody? Because I always have that conversation. If you could make yourself go 6 months without looking at those metrics and instead focus on your content, you're going to be in a much better place. I don't know if we're all conditioned to have that type of discipline. So is there a way to maybe put like a piece of tape over that number for when you log in? What do you guys
change the password? Change the password.
Something to block that. It would be nice if there was an option to turn it off. Like I could tell Buzzsprout, no, I don't want this on my home screen. I want to actually have to work to find this. But I don't know if we have that ability, but take some self-discipline to get there. What do you think people can do to make that happen?
Honestly, I think that this is a matter of look, we're going to obsess. I obsess over my download numbers still. It's just because I'm trained to, right? At this point, I think what it comes down to is really setting clear goals for the different metrics that are in fact in front of us, because it's not just the download numbers. So it's setting goals for the retention rates just as much as you're setting goals for the downloads, because there's an important reason why they matter, because you are attracting people to you. And if you want to learn how to attract more of them, you got to see what's working, what's not. So if let's say you're investing in Facebook ads, well, if you start seeing your downloads going up, something's going right there, but that's not the only thing at that point. Then it's okay. So then the next number is the retention rate, and set a goal for yourself. And are you hitting it? If you're not, you're going to start obsessing about refocusing, restructuring what you're doing to get that number up too. So I think it's a matter of not setting one goal with one set of numbers, but setting multiple goals with multiple sets of numbers.
And I would, along the same lines of that, I would say taking a look or making sure that your goals align, making sure that your goals that you're analyzing align with the goals that you have for your show and for your business. We work with a lot of business owners that use their show in other ways. So their goals are not necessarily to get hundreds and thousands of downloads on their podcast. Right. So I'm not someone who obsesses over downloads for my own stuff. I never really have been, to be honest with you. And I very much believe in there's no right or there's no wrong to that. It's just that I feel like I have so much going on in my day-to-day that like I'm not going to sit and worry about the numbers, because I truly believe that the message that we have to share far outweighs any fear around anything else. And so I believe that if you continue to show up in your own message, in your own integrity, and what you need, what you feel called to share, you use the numbers to guide you for creating future episodes, to guide you for potential sponsors, to guide you to, different speaking things and that kind of stuff. So I use podcasting a little bit differently, if you will. It would be amazing. Like I would never be upset if I had hundreds and thousands of downloads on my episodes. I would never be mad at that. But if that doesn't happen, I'm okay with that, because I feel like I'm still making the impact that is my goal, is impact. That's my goal. That's my goal first. But everyone's goals are different.
And Simona, it's something you said earlier. I think one of those goals that I will help with the obsession and is focusing on the conversion. Yes. Because a lot of us are podcasting because ultimately we're trying to bring in more business, land new customers, create new relationships. So that's a number that, again, yes, download numbers count, because you want to know, okay, I got 1,000 downloads on this episode, and this many people or people listen for this long, but how many of all of these people actually turned into a client? How many people actually went and took my call to action seriously and clicked on my website to get that freebie I'm giving away. That's all part of my funnel to eventually convert them. That's where those numbers are important to look at to really understand what your bigger goals are.
Yeah,
I agree.
And I would say building that full appreciation for the catalog that you're creating will help de-emphasize your obsession with the numbers, because the more you create content and build on your catalog, you prove the staying power. You prove that you're here for a reason. It's not just, well, let's see if we get a bunch of downloads. Well, we didn't, well, we're out. No, you care about your topic. You care about the subject matter of your podcast, and you want to make an impact on your audience. So you're going to consistently bring them new episodes to consume. The more you do that, the better you get, and the better the content gets, and that will fuel audience growth as well. But there's something to say. I don't know if there can't be exact science behind it, but there's something to say about hitting that 100 episode benchmark.
Oh, yeah.
Once you get beyond that, I think there's a lot of things that click into play in your mind in regards to, okay, I'm onto something here. I'm showing that I really do care about this. I really do want to see this through to make sure that people are getting what they want every time they listen. I like I said, can't apply an exact scientific explanation to it, but hitting those 3 digits, it's big. But not a lot of people get there. And that's, again, I feel like that's a byproduct of getting obsessed with download numbers for the wrong reason. Start focusing on what you're doing and go from there. It's going to be
100%. If you work with a producer or someone who is in this space, you will always feel good, I think, and you will always feel encouraged and inspired by your numbers, whatever they look like, because you're working with someone who knows what they're doing. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I will say too, we obviously can't negate the fact that a lot of people look at their downloads and they get frustrated. You look at it and you're like, why is my show not growing? Why is this not working? Why have my downloads stalled? Why am I still in the same spot that I was a year ago? Then I invite you to take a look at, is your mission actually influenced in your message and in your marketing? Do an audit on your show. Do an audit on yourself. Are you actually sharing the content that people care about? What problem are you solving for? That would be my biggest advice.
Yeah, that's great. Mark, how about you? What's your biggest piece of advice when it comes to evaluating download numbers?
That the real value in download numbers comes from long-term tracking and pattern analysis. I think that's really where I think it, like I said, I'm somebody who does still care about those download numbers. And the real reason is because I am tracking them long-term, and I am seeing what patterns are developing so that I can tweak and change. I mean, Simona's been a part of the Podcasting Morning Chat for years, and I'm constantly changing how I do it. I mean, overall, the format has a similar feel, but I'm constantly changing, and adding a segment or doing a little something different. And it's all planned. It's all strategic. It's all based on all the different numbers that are available to me, not just one.
And Mark, you wouldn't necessarily know or have or make those changes if you didn't pay attention to the downloads and if you didn't have that data.
Exactly.
That's really important.
Yeah, I guess that would be a feather in the cap of download numbers and paying attention to them, because why make tweaks and adjustments? And if it wasn't broke in the first place, why would you try to fix it?
Right.
And not evaluating your data would help you miss that. So I could see, I see your point there. As we wind this down, I will go back to what I said before, is to focus on the quality of your content and let the numbers fall into place naturally. It's a metric that we're going to have at our disposal. As Mark said, we don't have a lot of them to utilize. So I think almost by default, we are going to that metric first. But when you do that, make sure you're evaluating it the right way. Don't get thrown off because this week's episode didn't do as well as last week's. If they're in the same vicinity, you can pretty much guarantee you've got the majority of the loyal audience coming back for more content. But at the same time, not emphasizing the download metric and emphasizing how good your content is, how well you're communicating with your audience, what kind of conversations are happening within the community outside of your podcast. There's so much more value in that, and it's going to be much more fulfilling to have those types of connections versus hitting a number. And that's how I will drop the mic on this.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Unless you guys have one more point to add on, we're going to wrap this baby up.
No, I think you said it well. Everybody did.
Well, Simona, unless you want to stay consistent and do another song for us.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know.
No, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Okay. I'm not. It has to come. It's like doing stand-up comedy or something like that. Look, I'd be horrible if I prepared a set, but if you asked me to crack a couple of jokes, I probably could do a good job.
Well, it's becoming a consistent segment here on the Co-Host Collective series of season 3, the sing along with Simona. So next time you're on the show, we'll make this happen. So
Simona sing-alongs.
I need a song about downloads if someone wants to.
So
Bomb Squad, tool for that.
Yeah, you plug that into ChatGPT and see what you get back. That'll be fun.
I should have come more prepared.
No, you were great as always, and Mark, same to you. I appreciate both of you taking the time to join me and tackling this very important subject. So, Bomb Squad, if download metrics are something you've got in the front of your mind, slide it back a little bit and focus on your content first. Don't rule them out completely, but at the same time, think about what you're doing with the entire scope of your podcast, and that's going to tell the story of how your download metrics fall into place. So on that note, we are going to sign off on this installment of the Co-Host Collective series here on Let's Blow This Up. I am Jason Sircone. Mark and Simona, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
Until next time, Bomb Squad, stay explosive.